Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources Podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policymaking for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast is Tim Cairns, former Special Advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson. Hello, Tim.
Hello, David.
And we also have our other regular, Michael McKernan. He was a former Special Advisor to the SDLP. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. And hello, Tim.
Okay.
Hello, Michael. Can I just say for the record, nobody forced me to say hello to Michael. It was your very poor intro, David, that excluded me from saying hello to Michael.
But it is nonetheless very welcome.
Well, that's it. The amount of people who have said, that David McCann, he forced you into saying hello to Michael. Yeah, that I want to say is David's poor intro.
Well, you were shamed into doing it. It's the reality of it. So our thanks to Lisa, who did shame you into doing that. A loyal listener who stopped me on Royal Avenue. Anyway, let's get on with the podcast. So on the podcast today, the SDLP met last Saturday for their annual conference. Michael and myself were there, and we're going to look at how it went and whether Hanna's shift on a new Ireland can win back voters. Then a new BBC podcast has hit the airwaves, hosted by Chris Buckler and produced by the BBC. Borderland takes a look at the constitutional question with two former MPs, and already some of the content is making the headlines. We will be getting reaction to some of the things that have been said. But before we get in to the podcast proper, we have some listener questions that we thought we would get to and deal with. Now, Michael, someone was in touch from Ireland's Future, who took a little bit of exception, but in a nice way, to the comments you made last week about a border poll, about particularly 2030 being named as a potential year for it. So Jerry got in touch and sent us in and said the comment was nothing to do with 2030 being a round number and latching onto it. Much more to do with trends, trajectories, and what experts and academics are saying. So, Michael, do you want to apologise and capitulate on what you said before? Thanks to Jerry for getting in touch with us, by the way, and putting in that comment.
And thank you to Jerry for a very purposeful comment. I look back on some of this history and I see people projecting United Ireland and border polls by 2016. Simply because it was the 100th anniversary of 1916. And I heard Mary Lou talk about 2030. And I'm delighted if Jerry says there's a load of science behind that, then who am I to question him? But it is a big round number. She did say it. And on the basis of my own science, it doesn't really stack up. If you just look at the numbers, last few elections, Sinn Féin, SDLP together are sort of high 30s, 38, 39%. If you be generous and throw in the Green vote, the people before profit vote, into and assorted independent Republicans aren't very many.
Well, it's not about being generous. I mean, into are pro-United Ireland.
Well, let me get to the point. I'm throwing them in. Well, the Greens aren't necessarily, but throwing them in, and that gets you up to 42, 43%. And then I'm going to be even more generous and say, let's take half the Alliance vote. Last time, 13.5%. So we'll add 6 or 7%, and that will take you into the 48, 49. So as generous as I can be, it's sitting around there, 48, 49. Getting close, undoubtedly getting close. Now, what might happen between now and 2030? Well, of course, there's the lowering of the voting age, and we did an expert Stormont Sources analysis of that, and I think we concluded that, yes, I'll probably add a little bit to the Sinn Féin vote, maybe 1%. So there you are, sitting on a tantalising 48, 49, 49.5% by 2030. Now, I would have thought the Secretary of State certainly would sit up and take notice of that, but I think those numbers need to push into the low 50s before the Secretary of State could say, well, there's a reasonable prospect of a border poll favouring the outcome of United Ireland. Well, that's my science. So I think the 2030 is slightly premature.
Okay, well,
just on that, can we just
heavens
say...
knows who the Secretary of State will be in 2030.
So regrettably, even though I have the greatest of regard for Jerry, a very successful business person and leading light in Ireland's future, I'm afraid I can't apologise for it.
Well, Tim, to be fair to Jerry, the apology was from me, was requested from me, not from Jerry. Now, Tim, I see you're eager as always to engage in the constitutional conversation. So
I was just going to say, just for Jerry's benefit and Michael's benefit and your benefit, David, and for our listeners' benefit, there will not be a United Ireland within any of our lifetimes. Anybody listening to this podcast will not live to see United Ireland. Their kids won't. Look, Jerry and his friends in the New Ireland may as well pick 2360 because it's not going to matter. It's not.
Well,
that
is really disappointing because I am by far the oldest of us.
And I'm afraid, David. I'm afraid, Michael.
Not even David's lifetime.
Not even young David's lifetime. Or even if David is blessed with children, it'll not even happen in his children's lifetime either.
Brilliant. So. Okay. Well, that remains to be seen. Let's wait and see what happens. I mean, this time 10 years ago, we would have said we will stay in the European Union. So, I mean, let's wait and see what happens. I don't think we can predict the future. So we'll wait and see how all that goes. Now we have another question in. This is from Niall McGinn, and we love these type of questions. Proper nerdy stuff.
Great footballer.
So Niall, I don't think it's the same person, although I did have to Google Niall McGinn whenever that joke was made.
But before we started recording, I did sing the song that Northern Ireland fans sing, which perplexed David.
Okay, let's not get into that. So, good morning, or even though we're recording in the afternoon, the Executive Office published the Executive Legislation Programme 2025 to 26 at the end of last week. The programme consists of 21 bills, including 2 which have been brought forward from the 2024-25 programme. How does this compare to other legislatures, taking into consideration the relative size of the NI Assembly? I wonder if it is possible to compare the productivity of different legislatures. Many thanks, Niall. P.S. was recently introduced to the podcast and really enjoying it. Thank you very much, Niall. Tim, I'll let you go to this. This was something I actually have taken a look at before, but I was looking at lengths of time to publish a programme for government, and we didn't fare too well, lads. I don't mind telling you.
Well, let's deal with the programme for government first. What was the difference in lengths of time?
Well, basically, the Republic managed to do theirs within literally just a couple of weeks. So the election was in November, and they were able to publish the programme for government basically by the January. Even during the pandemic, they still did it faster than we did back in 2020. Remember, the election was in the February in the Republic, and then the pandemic hit in the March. In Wales, they were able to do it within just a few weeks. Scotland, even though people always say, well, we're negotiating between parties, but Nicola Sturgeon managed to get the Butte House Agreement together. That was also within literally just a few weeks. We took months. Our executive came back in February of 2024, and it was only until the start of this year, it was nearly a year before we got our programme for government published in draft form. So not good. We really took a much longer time. And you think about the King's Speech for Keir Starmer, which is effectively the programme for government for the UK. They did that within a month of the general election. They had their agenda, their first legislative agenda out. So yeah, the programme for government, not good. So
they're not divided societies. So in fairness, to compare us with Westminster, to compare us with the SNP in Scotland, compare us with Labour in Wales, it's a little unfair, David.
Is it? But well, hang on. Nicola Sturgeon had to negotiate with another political party.
Another political party who are broadly in agreement.
Well, she still had to do it. In the Republic, you had to have the negotiation between Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and a number of independents as well. They were able to.
Well, I left Ireland off my list there. I said Scotland and Wales and Westminster.
Okay,
very unfair.
Some of us are not.
We'll come to Ireland.
Some of us are not partitionists, Tim. We do.
We'll come to Ireland in a minute, and we'll speak about their vagaries. But I think it is very unfair.
The Island of Ireland continues beyond Uri, just FYI.
Where they had a left wing political party in the SNP and a more left wing party in terms of the Greens come together. It's not like a socialist Marxist Sinn Féin and a conservative, at least socially conservative DUP trying to come together. I mean, could you imagine the SNP and the Tories and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens all sitting down in Scotland to form a programme for government?
Hate to pick you up on this, and I'm sure Callum, who is our producer, you don't see him, but he's in the background here. The first SNP government was actually propped up by none other than the Conservatives, by the way, from 2007 to 2011. So the Welsh Labour Party had to do confidence supply with Plaid Cymru, by the way, a nationalist party. They've had to do it with the Lib Dems before. So I just think...
You've dodged the question. Do you think
I'm
the
not
Greens,
dodging the question.
SNP,
so okay, let me put it back.
Conservatives in Scotland could all sit down and do a programme for government?
Well, let me go back to you when we started off.
The Tories and the DUP, of course.
Yeah, well, let me go back to your comments whenever we first launched this podcast and we looked at the programme for government that you lambasted, that you said wasn't really that good. And so, which is it though, Tim? So you agree it took them a long time to produce a document that you didn't think was very good. All I'm noting, Tim, is that in other democracies where multi-party coalitions are put in place, they don't take up to a year.
Well, you can walk and chew gum. Look, a year's too long. Of course, a year's too long.
So we're in agreement then. Good.
So probably
that's good.
Something that's acceptable. 3 months is acceptable. The only thing I'm pointing out, David, is you aren't really comparing apples with apples when you say
Fine.
that the SNP can do it very quickly. Labour and Westminster can do it very quickly.
If the programme for government came out in June, considering the executive was formed in the February and it took until June, you can understand that there are more parties completely. Yes, that would be. I wouldn't have expected it by April or May, Tim. But I think by the start of the summer,
certainly
July,
by the end of the
by the end of June 2024, I think would have been fair.
Yeah. When the summer recess is coming in,
Yeah.
you allow the summer for people to respond to the consultation, to get back into September, to filter those comments and move on. And just pointing out, it's we do a lot of kicking against the executive in this podcast, but in fairness to them, they do have something that's slightly unique. Anyway, none of that answers Niall's question at all. Niall was asking about legislation, and we have 21 bills that are in front of the Assembly. I think Niall had said was in the programme that was set out. Currently, Scotland has 7 and Wales has 5. Again, I think you've got to give a health warning on comparing Scotland and Wales to Northern Ireland right now. They're in the mouth of an election next year. So Scotland has, I think, quite a few private members' bills going through as well. There's some on assisted dying and some on, Nordic model and that sort of thing. And they're going through. And so I think we can't really compare like with like now. And Northern Ireland probably does slightly underperform. But I think it's very important to say legislation is not always the answer. And our media and media across the UK are always very focused on what is the legislative output of the various parliaments and assemblies across the UK. And I think we do have to say legislation is not always appropriate. That said, Northern Ireland is always a little behind Scotland and Wales, although right now, obviously with the mouth of an election, Scotland has 7 government bills, Wales is 5. And so, Northern Ireland can obviously be a little more ambitious having another year to that election.
Yeah, and the one thing I would just note about, they don't all have equal competencies as well. So some are like Scotland. I think the Scottish Parliament is now more powerful than the Northern Ireland Assembly has more competencies.
That depends
on a few. Whereas Wales does have fewer competencies than we do. Although I have to say the Welsh, even from 2021, even if you scale back to the start of the term, the Welsh legislative record isn't that good.
Well, and I think the other thing that we need to say is, yes, whilst their competencies are less as well, interestingly, I think our friends on Stormont Sources, which started last week, if people want to get a bit more of a flavour now, if you want to get more of a flavour of Welsh politics, tune in there, or Holyrood Sources for Scotland, they are about to expand their parliament and bring in more members of the Welsh Parliament, and they're about to bring in more people, which goes against the flow of where we're at as well. I think if somebody was to say, let's go back to the old Assembly and increase the numbers again, I think you wouldn't get very many people taking that up yet. That seems to be what's happening across the piece, and those people in those parliaments do get paid more as well, considerably more.
Yes.
Okay, well, good luck making that argument.
Just Sam, we're not comparing apples with apples.
Yeah, I agree with that. We aren't comparing the same thing, and the total number doesn't really tell you that much. And it's not just the different competencies. There's a lot of lightweight stuff goes through or gets planned, and you can't even see a clear read across from a programme for government to the legislative programme. So it really is a mix up of stuff, and you can't just say, well, that assembly or that parliament is performing better than the other one because it's got more. I mean, the way to ask your question for yourself is to say, what is coming out of Stormont before the next election in terms of major legislation? And if you can say what that is. I mean, Paul Given, the action man of the executive, he'll have a good bunch of things, whether that's all good or not, I don't know. And then you get legislation, which I think Mark Durkan once termed it karaoke legislation, which is stuff that originates in Westminster but formally has to be carried through the devolved assemblies and so on. So difficult to make comparisons. There's nobody saying that our legislature is unproductive, but certainly there's not a lot happening or not a lot of output from the programme for government.
Well, we should just note that one of the bills that the Assembly has passed, the Executive has passed, it was repealing a private member's bill from the period about hospital parking charges. That was one of the bills that was rushed through to make
Well, that was
car
a
parking
buck
charges.
daft bill. That was a
And
buck daft bill.
Robin
at the
Swan
time.
had to come back and as health
I mean,
minister.
anybody,
and,
that was one of those ones in the mouth of an election.
Yeah, it was,
Nobody
yeah.
could vote against, right? But everybody knew this is crazy. I think even the proposers of the bill, were shocked that it went through.
But also, our assembly's descended into, you get government parties bringing motions to the assembly, calling on the government to do things. And the big debate yesterday about facilities for women who have mental health challenges after pregnancy and so on. And all good stuff, but the government should be getting on with doing something about it rather than bringing motions about it.
We need to get that hospital built. That's a good point.
and that was an issue. It was brought up. It was a Sinn Féin motion this week, but fair play for highlighting it because it is actually big. It's a disgrace that we a disgrace that we haven't progressed that. Okay,
yeah, but get on and do it rather than have silly set piece debates about it.
So let's get into the podcast proper. Thank you very much for your questions. We always love getting them, and we do read them all, and we will get round to some of the other ones that are sitting there. So don't worry if you sent in a question and we haven't got to it yet. We will get to it. So don't worry about that. So our first topic for today is the SDLP met on Saturday in Belfast for their annual conference. There was plenty of talk about a new Ireland, with party leader Clare Hanna calling for the creation of a Department for Irish Unification. The conference had former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar in attendance, seated beside none other than our own Michael McKernan, who then went on to share a panel with the Southern parties on, you guessed it, how we create a new Ireland. Now, let's talk a little bit about the conference, the pitch. There's been analysis. I'll give a shameless plug for my column in the Irish News on today, Wednesday, about the move of
haven't read it.
The move of, well, you're missing out.
He said gleefully.
But there is an interesting dynamic going on here, because when Clare Hanna took over last year, people were talking about the fact that she was the less green of the two SDLP MPs. Colm Eastwood was the green one, and now the SDLP were going to just not focus so much on that in the way they did under Colm Eastwood. And yet Clare Hanna went to town on none other than Irish unification. She made a call for the Irish government to create a department for unification, and her speech focused very heavily on it. In fact, actually, I've been going to SDLP conferences since 2014. I know Michael's probably gone to every one in living memory, but
my first one in years.
I can't recall an SDLP conference that I've been to that focused so much criticism on just the fundamentals of the existence of Northern Ireland. Michael, you played a pretty starring role at the conference. What is your analysis of why that's happening?
Well, I think as time passes, we realise that things are not working very well in the government of Northern Ireland, and even the broad outlook for Northern Ireland itself isn't great. So the conference did focus on, it was pretty idealistic stuff, focusing on a whole new future for the island. And I think where Clare Hanna would maybe have drawn a difference from traditional thinking about United Ireland was that she was saying, look, it's not a question of just when can we nail down this border poll, get the vote over and done with, and the South takes over the North. That is kind of old thinking, and it's time for new thinking about what sort of island should we have in the future, with everything on the table and all sorts of possibilities as outcomes, and no focus on the border poll timing at this point, no focus on silly things like, what flag and the type of thing. It fills a few minutes of talk radio. That you actually sit down and say, what is this vision for this new island that we believe in? I think Leo Varadkar has kind of supercharged this, and he probably insisted on being seated at my table, but that's a matter for himself. But he has injected some clear thinking into this debate, and just as you're saying, David, that possibly Colm Eastwood and Clare Hanna have passed each other like ships in the night and swapped positions on the broad question of unity. Well, that appears to be happening between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, where and I actually put it to the Fianna Fáil representative at the conference that Micheal Martin, in ruling out Irish unity until the process of reconciliation had been completed, was effectively handing unionists a veto. Now he gave me, and that Micheal Martin was way out there ahead of his own flock, even, never mind the plain people of Ireland. He gave me the politician's answer, which is that reconciliation is very important, etc., 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 and we want a united Ireland that will last. But I pointed out that reconciliation was supposed to be the next phase after the Good Friday Agreement. Hume, if you follow the Hume blueprint, he called it commencing the healing process. Well, we've had 30 years since the Good Friday Agreement, and we're probably pretty close to being as divided as we were then. Which is a real pity, but it means that structural change, as is Clare's point, can't just wait till we're all reconciled and everybody loves everybody. Yeah. If the majority of people in Northern Ireland want change, now is the time to start thinking about it, to start visualising it, and to draw some structural plans for it, starting with, instead of people like Colm Eastwood's New Ireland Commission, and I'm sure you're going to come on to that,
yep.
And Ireland's future and all, kind of lobbying for United Ireland, it is actually time now to set up in the Irish government a Department for Irish Unity or Irish Reunification led by a senior minister, and that thinking and the work there should permeate the work of all of government. That's Clare's big point.
There we are, and no better man to potentially take on that job than Tim Cairns. Tim, what do you make of just the idea of a minister for Irish? I can see from your face, for anyone who's listening, Tim is screwing his face up at me. Is there any merit in a Irish minister for unification? And I'll put this the other way. Is there a merit in a similar type of minister in the UK cabinet? You know, a minister for the union?
I've never heard of anything more ridiculous in my life than a minister for the union. But anyway, look, if the Irish government want to do what the Irish government want to do, they can have a minister for whatever they want to have a minister for, and that's entirely up to them. And
East Belfast.
They could have, if they want to have a minister for East Belfast, they can have a minister for East Belfast. I'm not sure what that minister would do or how they would occupy their time. That's a matter for themselves. Sovereign governments can do whatever sovereign governments want to do, and what I think about them doesn't matter a jot. I mean, in terms of the conference, there's just a couple of things that really stick out to me. I do want to say, because in your announcing this segment, you did say, David, Michael and I were at the conference before we start getting negative feedback of, did Tim just not go to the conference and what a bad person he is. Can I very quickly say, I wasn't at the DUP conference either, and I haven't been unwell. I've been very unwell the last couple of weekends. So happily, although if you did remember my comments from about 3 podcasts ago where I likened and what I likened political conferences to, you may well think I was pretty glad that I was ill and couldn't go. So I wasn't there, and not through any slight on anybody, as David was, I think, cheekily trying to imply at the start of this segment. But there was, in terms of conference, I did think Clare's speech was interesting for a number of reasons. One of which was, this is the second year in a row that she's kind of flubbed the speech a little bit. Now, last year I put that down to nerves. She's leader and she's nervous and there's big attention on her. This year, I wondered what that was about. It can't be nerves. I mean, she speaks in the House of Commons every day. You know, she's a political operator. Yeah. And I think the unfortunate thing for her, for those of us who didn't go to the conference and didn't hear the speech in its full, the couple of sound bites that they picked, which were actually quite good, were 2 of the places where she kind of lost the auto cue and it didn't work quite well. It put me in mind of, will someone turn these lights off?
Oh,
was
Tim,
as
it
bad
wasn't
as
that
that.
bad. It wasn't as bad.
Well, I'll tell you why I was surprised. Because if you listen to her on Monday morning on the Nolan show, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
If you listen to her in any media interview, she's really, really good. And it's just jarringly surprising, just in the 2 big set piece speeches that she's done, that it just hasn't been as polished as it could be.
I think even Clare's supporters and people who would know her know that that's just not her for that particular aspect. You're right. She's great in studio. She handled all the interviews well. Great on Talkback. Great on View from Stormont. Great on Sunday Politics. That's just not her. Can
I ask a question of you 2 that were there? Maybe Michael knows the answer to this. Did she practice the speech in front of the auto cue or not?
Oh yes.
Yeah, there was a practice session. Yeah,
I have to say the conference was
it's just
very professionally run, and she
it's just not
she did
everyone.
have a couple of minor slip-ups in delivering the speech, but apart from that, I thought it was very good.
It was just the couple of minor slip-ups, as you say, were the ones that were then broadcast, because that's a soundbite about Farage. It was quite good, but she just kind of flubbed it halfway through.
I think it's just not her. It's not her forte. But I think Clare would be the first to say that set piece, that type of thing. So the only thing is, maybe for the SDLP, it's because in Michael's panel, the Q&A session, she was really good on that as well. I think she just lends herself more. Like, some politicians are great at the set piece thing, but Tim Fall's pieces in an interview, they're not great at the set piece.
I think you're picking on a really minor part of the overall event.
Claire, just give it my opinion, Michael.
Clare was the absolute star of the show, and the party is now eating out of her hand. She has total control.
She is undoubtedly the jewel in the SDLP. I was going to say crown. I'm not sure the SDLP has a crown.
Crown's okay.
But, the jewel on the SDLP's beanie hat, miming one and crown. I don't know.
Crown,
but
no, it's a fair look. I think it's a fair criticism, Tim. I don't think set piece speeches, those leader speeches, are not Clare's forte, and I think that is a fair criticism.
And I just asked, does she practice, because it did feel like a little bit of it that
there's an underlying
reading off an auto cue is hard.
There's an underlying suggestion there that this excellent politician is somehow amateurish in her preparation. Absolutely not.
Well, no suggestion.
Well honed and practiced.
Well, because I was going to tell a story about Peter Robinson at conferences. Like, you may be surprised to know that Peter Robinson practiced his speech within an inch of his life every single year. He would be there very late into the early hours of Friday morning, practicing until he almost didn't need the auto cue. It was there just really as a crutch in case he lost his place. So, so I would say to anybody who's an aspiring public speaker, practice is completely underrated. Stand up and practice what you're speaking, practice what you're saying, and you cannot practice enough.
Well, do you remember? I remember this was Peter Robinson's last conference speech, so this would have been about 10 years ago. One of the BBC cameramen knocked over the auto cue as he was coming up to the thing, and Peter Robinson was a guy who couldn't really hide whenever he was angry or annoyed. And Peter Robinson standing on stage, the BBC camera or whoever, I don't know if it was BBC, I'm probably blaming the BBC, but a cameraman or something knocked over the teleprompter.
Probably RTE.
And Peter Robinson's face just dropped, and the audience just had to keep applauding.
Well, if you remember, there was a couple of people running over trying to adjust it back into position. Crawling.
He was not happy because this is Peter Robinson's last ever leader speech, so he had to get it right. But no, I remember that. I remember the hall would be off bounds for Peter. Practicing.
Because I remember being in on a Friday night when he was doing the practice, and it would be me, a couple of other people, and the bodyguard,
and that's the one thing I have to say that the DUP get really right about their conferences, and Gavin got this right this year, is they get the theatre, the need for a theatre atmosphere. Now the SDLP, I think, have gotten a bit better at that. Alliance were hopeless at it. And they still are a bit hopeless at it. They still don't really know when to stand up for the lead. Even with Naomi, they still don't really know when to do that. But the DP really get the theatre. Shinners get the theatre of it as well. But anyway, it's one of those things you have to get right. But just on the general other parts of the conference that I thought really leapt out at me. So the focus on Irish unity, which we've covered as well. We did talk last week about the guns all of a sudden being trained on the Alliance Party. That continued. Clare did focus on that in her speech. Matthew O'Toole focused on it in his speech. I just wonder, did we hear anything at that conference that could start to win back some of those voters that the SDLP have? Start. It's only a conference, but start to win back those voters. Michael, what do you think?
Well, setting aside all the New Ireland stuff, I thought the most impressive person in the conference and the most important person in the conference after Clare was Matthew O'Toole, the Lotto, the leader of the opposition. And he was at pains, he made a very good speech, but he was at pains to say that the party, firstly, is in opposition and is a constructive opposition. And he illustrated that with many instances of where the party had taken up an issue but proposed an alternative and tried to make things better. And it struck me just in the course of that and the other contributions from other speakers that this SDLP assembly team is a small team, but it actually packs quite a punch. And it's not just Matthew, per capita, Colin McGrath, Mark H. Durkin, Daniel McCrossan, Cara Hunter, they're on the ball and they're making an impact with very small numbers in the assembly. Now we go back to Tim's old thing. Does that cut through? But I think that side of things made an impact. We are actually getting stuck in at Stormont, and we're not just trying to be a flea in the ear of the First Minister or a nuisance. We are trying to show that there's a better way, that these people ought to be doing more, and in particular, holding them to account for what they said they would do, not holding them into account for motherhood and apple pie and unachievable targets, holding them to account for what they said they would do. And that came across quite strongly. I think the party, since Clare took over, those guys have been out on the training field doing laps and getting ready to be fit to take on the executive.
Okay, I'll go to Tim. I'm not sure I agree with your positive thing about how the opposition is performing there, Michael. But
look, I've got to say two things, but I'll say this first. Michael mentions Cara Hunter there. I mean, it was very interesting for hardline unionists. So Jamie Bryson called me a moderate unionist on Twitter over the weekend, and I'm not sure I was blind affronted.
You were offended.
I was blind affronted. So, but Cara Hunter, for her, we've gone from colonisers to voting for a united Ireland. She said hardline. I mean, I have to say, I roared with laughter when I saw this on Twitter. She said hardline unionists are now saying to her that they're thinking of voting for a united Ireland. I mean,
but I said, setting all the New Ireland stuff apart, I'm talking about their day-to-day work in their day job. Her day job is mental health, women's safety, women's issues. That's what she's spokesperson for, and I think she's carving out a niche for herself in that area.
I don't know. I think focusing on whether speeches are written by AI ministers and then one of your MLAs has a ChatGPT account. I just don't know if that cuts through with.
No, I think that was a bit of a silly one from Matthew.
It was referenced in Clare's and in Matthew's speeches. So at the
they have owned the AI.
But I think ironically,
they have owned the AI gaff, which is fine. I have no problem with that. They made a gaff on that. He's owned it. Make a joke of it. Move on. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, look, we've talked about the opposition way more than they should be talked about in this podcast. To be honest with you, there still isn't any cut through. Still no sign from the conference there's going to be cut through. I like Matthew. Matthew seems like a good guy, seems like a decent fella, but he's not having any cut through in the general public at all.
We don't know. We don't know that, Tim. We don't know.
Well, we know that from Poland, David, or Michael. I mean, if the SDLP get up over 13% in the next poll that the Bell Tell and Lucid talk to, then you can start to say they're having cut through. Because the SDLP need to get back to over 13% to start to win back the seats.
Yeah, but they were at 8 or 9, they're now at 11. 13 is not beyond them,
and it's not beyond them, but they need to be up over 13. That's where they were at the last Assembly election, the one before last.
I want to caveat the poll. I mean, they got 9% the last 11. That's still within the margin of error of where that could be. They could still be down on 9 though. Could
still be on 9, or they could
still be on 9. Or just Michael.
Or up.
But 13% is where they were 2 Assembly elections ago. If they want to get their seats back from the Alliance Party, they need to get back to 13%. Is what I saw in the conference last week a winning strategy to get them back to that 13%? No. But I think they're starting to go on the right lines. Attack Alliance. They are your enemy in this election. It is not the DUP. Please, no more campaigns. Stop the DUP. For goodness sake, wise yourselves up. You're starting on the right path.
They've no need to do it because the TUV is now taking over that mantle. Well, they're stopping the DUP.
Let the TUV stop the DUP because SDLP are never going to stop them.
But that is, but that is a problem for the SDLP in that for many people, the opposition in Stormont is Timothy Gaston. It's not the SDLP, and that is an issue. Again, I'm with Tim. I think Matthew intellectually doing a great job, like on a policy level. I really like the questions he makes, and that's great for a policy nerd like me.
No. Timothy Gaston is the court jester. He's not the opposition.
But he's getting the sound bites. You look at his impressions on Twitter compared to Matthew O'Toole's.
That's what the public. I'll give you one story about how this matters. 2022, I know of someone who had voted SDLP in in 2017. They voted alliance in 2022. Why? They were watching Sunday Politics one day. Naomi Long had an amazing soundbite on it and went, I want to vote for that Naomi Long. Didn't live in East Belfast, but they switched their vote from the SDLP to alliance just off the back of her ability to get attention in that campaign. So that does matter for the North.
So you have one person and you've now extrapolated that.
Well, how did the election, how did the 2022 election go for alliance in the SDLP, Michael?
Well, I mean, we all know the.
No, there we go. Well, there we go. There's a lot of people must have thought that, though. So in the way
they may not have seen that soundbite.
No, I didn't say just over that one soundbite. It's a narrative, Michael. Alliance crowded out the SDLP is what I'm saying.
The SDLP need to try and crowd out Alliance, and they're just not doing it at the moment. Look, I would love to go to a pub and sit down with Matthew O'Toole and have a whole afternoon talking about policy. I'm sure we would have a great afternoon. But trying to get him to distill that... It is fun.
I can vouch Matthew is good.
Trying to get him to distill that to 30 seconds on Twitter, he has to do that. And so far, we've not seen the ability of the SDLP to do that. If they want to crowd out Alliance, that's what they need to do. As sad as that is, I would rather have the 4-hour policy chat over a few pints. But unfortunately, most of the public are not sad like us.
Yeah, and look, remains to be said, Michael, you could well be right. And look, even on reform of the institutions, they are starting to eat into that kind of thing that Alliance was able to do last time. So look, the seeds are there for the next 18 months. We've got a long way to go. So we'll see. But however, it hasn't been all rosy for the SDLP this week. In fact, actually today, we are recording on Wednesday evening. On the New Ireland file, there has been a bit of a drop ball, and again, we're going to be getting into the Borderland podcast from the BBC in our next segment, but we'll just touch upon this now. It'd be remiss of us not to mention this. So the New Ireland Commission, which was set up by the SDLP 4 years ago, today a story reported by the BBC has put the party in an awkward spot. Reverend Norman Hamilton, who was on the advisory panel for the New Ireland Commission, only found out on a BBC podcast, Borderlands, that he and the rest of the 32-member panel are no longer part of it. This has been criticised by Hamilton, who's called for an apology by the SDLP leader. Tim, first of all, to start off with, a 32-member panel, what on earth are they thinking? I mean, Jesus only needed 12 apostles. You know, Jesus only needed 12 apostles. The SDLP needed 32 members. It apparently he never met in person. It only ever did a meeting online. Hasn't met in ages.
Well, look, I mean, if you're going to drop people, you should probably tell them before they're on the news. Although I kind of felt some of the outrage about it was a little bit, knee-jerk and manufactured. I mean, like, you're not on this commission anymore. The commission didn't matter. It's not like it's a paid gig or anything. Move on. I do think common decency and niceness probably means you drop somebody an email and say, listen, we're going to drop that commission. I don't think in the grand scheme of things this matters a jot. I just think it's very unfortunate. Looks a little bit embarrassing for Colm Eastwood. Looks a little bit embarrassing for the party. If I was Clare Hanna, I'd just pick up the phone to Norman Hamilton and say, look, Norman, really sorry about that. We made a mistake. Look, next time you're about Stormont, let's grab a coffee. Like, that's it. Stormont to keep teacup done.
Don't disagree with that. I think if you appoint someone to something and you move on and decide to collapse it, it's discourtesy at the very minimum, not to inform them in advance or not to let them know. There's no argument about that. It doesn't have to be a big grandstanded issue with big public apologies or anything like that. Yeah. And the Reverend Norman Hamilton, my knowledge of the chap, I wouldn't have put him on it in the first place, but that's another issue.
This will be like for poor David when we find out we've dropped him from the podcast.
Really? Okay. Well, good luck with that. No one else would put up with the two of you.
You need a long memory. The Reverend Norman Hamilton was right there on the scene of the Holy Cross primary school issue, and he was sort of nearly the spokesperson for the loyalist community that objected to these schoolgirls going up their road to school. So. Never really fancied him since then.
Right. Okay.
That's lucky you're not a Presbyterian, then, Michael.
Yeah. Well. Look, I suppose it is just a bit of an embarrassing. But I think it kind of does speak to a bit more of like, what is this commission for? What is it actually doing? And I think it brings.
Well, it was always preposterous.
Yeah, I think it brings up uncomfortable questions for the SDLP, and kind of if Clare's going to anchor herself in the New Ireland side, this thing does need to start doing something.
Well, I think its focus is now kind of research.
Well, good. Well, it needs to start.
So
And
Let's
that's
leave it
where it
that way.
always should have been.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
research and events, you know. And look, if Colm Eastwood could do an equivalent of what Lee Reynolds and Pete Shirley were doing, and have, you know, Colm Eastwood and, you know, an academic.
What going around kidding people that the union is safe?
Going around what? Sorry, telling people.
Going around kidding people that the
Or
union
killing
is
people.
safe?
I thought you said killing people.
Well, with
Just need
boredom,
to-
who knows, Tim?
Well, yes,
with
I was
boredom.
gonna say, well, Pete and Lee, yes, you might drop down a boredom.
No, you just need to watch the editor. Very much
can we
kidding.
just say to Lee,
With
who's a friend
these.
of this, to Lee, who's a friend of this podcast, I apologise unreservedly for teasing your roadshow. We ultimately retract that on behalf of Shortbread Media and Stormont
Don't
Sources.
worry. Lee doesn't listen to this podcast because when me and Lee worked together in the DUP policy unit, he refused to allow me to speak any day but a Friday. So,
Well, look, we'll wait and see. Anyway, a bit embarrassing, but sure, we will move on. Lots more to come from Tim and Michael. We'll look at the new BBC Borderland podcast in a bit. Remember, if you would like to watch the podcast, head to YouTube and search for Stormont Sources. Press subscribe to the channel to get our latest episodes. Watch our clips and leave your comments on X and TikTok, and be the first to hear about upcoming events and special episodes. Subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. Let's talk now about a new podcast that has been launched today. Just a reminder, we're recording on the evening of Wednesday, the 8th of October. This new podcast is called Borderland, and it's hosted by Chris Buckler. It features two former MPs, Sinn Féin's Michelle Gildernew and the DUP's Ian Paisley. The podcast is already making news. The DUP has put out a statement making clear that Paisley is not speaking on behalf of the DUP. I'll read you a little bit of that statement from the DUP. It's just from a spokesperson. The Democratic Unionist Party wishes to make clear that Mr. Ian Paisley is appearing in this series in his own personal capacity and not on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party. As Ian is no longer in public office, he is entitled to give his own views, but he is not appearing on behalf of the party. Now, a couple of comments have been made by a number of kind of different contributors that have caused headlines. Ironically, and we'll get to the oddness of the DUP statement because Ian Paisley's not the one making the news. It's Michelle Gildernew, the former Sinn Féin MP. In the first two episodes that have been published, in one of them she refers to Northern Ireland as quote unquote a shithole. That was actually kept in the BBC podcast. And then there was a bit of a debate between her and Jamie Bryson, who's been on this podcast before, friend of yours, Tim. And there was talk about, were killings legitimate during the Troubles? And there was a bit of a debate about that. And the two of them kind of acknowledged that some killings, in their view, were legitimate, although Michelle Gildernew did say it was regrettable, and Jamie Bryson did say deaths of civilians were regrettable as well. It was a very depressing part of the podcast actually to listen to. So that's the kind of setup. I'm going to go to you first on this, Tim. The DUP statement, first of all, just out of the traps. Ian Paisley is not actually courted in these first two episodes. Now, maybe there will be something coming. There are more episodes that we haven't heard. But he didn't court any controversy in this. So what provoked the DUP to put out this statement?
I suspect it was in response to the Nolan show this morning, where Nolan was probing, is this now DUP party policy to be open to a conversation in all Ireland? And I think they wanted to shut that down. And I think it was wholly in response to that. That's my hunch. And I think they thought that was maybe going to emerge as a story through the day. And I suppose they've now got their spoken and saying Ian Paisley doesn't speak for the party. The most interesting thing I thought in listening to the first couple of episodes was, Sinn Féin will be thinking to themselves, goodness, why did we ever cut Michelle Gildernew free? Because she is saying all the things out loud that Sinn Féin do not want to be said out loud. The most interesting part for me was in that Jimmy Bryson and Michelle Gildernew conversation, he says there and starts pushing her, when were you ever discriminated against? Well, come on, tell me when you ever discriminated against? And she kind of huffs and puffs and stutters and stammers, but she was bothered a bit by the police. And he said, yeah, but sure, you were in Sinn Féin and you supported the IRA. Of course the police are going to bother. And she had no real answer for that. I just thought, like, that was quite stunning that she wasn't fit for the questioning she was getting. Now, the bit that you did reference where Jamie Bryson just harangued her and harangued her and harangued her until at the point where she said, yeah, the killings were justified, and then he conceded, and I agree with, so now we're in agreement. I believe some of the killings were justified. Was quite a startling moment, I thought, within the podcast. That whole conversation, you haven't listened to it, is in the second episode, and that's quite a fascinating 10 minutes. Ian Paisley sits back and says nothing, and Chris Buckler notes that Ian Paisley says nothing. He says, Ian, you're silent, why are you silent here? And Ian then is even at a loss to try and describe the conversation, so startling as that. I just feel that in the episodes so far that Sinn Féin will be thinking to themselves, why did we ever allow her to be able to do this? Because this has not been good for her so far.
I was surprised that Michelle on the discrimination thing didn't go to town on the fact that her family were at the centre of one of the most famous in Caledon, which for any of our international listeners, Austin Curry, who was a SDLP, went on to become an SDLP politician. One of those famous pictures of the Troubles was Austin Curry being trailed out of this house in Caledon by the RUC because he occupied this house, because this house was given to a young woman who was linked to the Unionist Party over a family, the Gildernew family, which is Michelle's family. Michelle wasn't born until 1970, but this is 1968. And this was seen as symbolic of the housing discrimination that was going on in Northern Ireland in the 60s. So I'm surprised she didn't really go to town on it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You know, I think that you saw laid bare that she wasn't really fit for the task, and I was really shocked by that, because this is someone who's been an MP for eons of time. You know, very experienced politician, and she just didn't seem to be fit for the conversation that was being played out in front of her. And there was so much she could have said. The question that she was put under wasn't exactly difficult, and yet she just wasn't able to articulate her position. And I just have to say I was really shocked by that.
Michael?
Well, I haven't heard all of it, but it makes me wonder what the BBC's up to. You know, they've a number of political podcasts. They've Red Lines and Mark Carruthers, which is very proper and good guests and interviews and so on. And then they went for a more sort of let your hair down thing with Tara Mills and Declan Harvey, The State of Us. But I don't know that it's, you know, they're very good presenters, but I'm not sure that they really got into stuff, political stuff. Maybe they're constrained. So I think this was the BBC's attempt to really cut loose and get a spunky presenter and feisty contributors and put them together and see, will it fizz? I agree with Tim. Now, I haven't heard all of it, but I agree with Tim that Michelle didn't seem that well prepared. These podcasts aren't just as straightforward as people might think. But I thought when you get onto that old ground of was the killing justified, was the killing this, that, or the other, like I'm just fed up hearing that. I'm a disciple of John Hume. My political life has been that there has always been an alternative to violence, even if it's difficult. And so when I hear people coming on, qualifying it, justifying it, on any side, I just think, no, leave me alone. I don't want to go there.
I thought Ian Paisley's contribution was in it, because Ian Paisley was the one who came in and said, let's talk about the future. Because Michelle Gildernew did take it back. And look, it is part of his family's political record that Ian Paisley cut his teeth in politics here. Not exactly being a constructive influence. He attacked a moderate prime minister.
Well, there was another interesting part I just saw on that, where they had this exchange, Gildernew and Paisley, where he was saying, you know, you do get that if people say ooh ah up the rah, that's an offence to me and my neighbours. And if somebody was to say slogans about loyalist paramilitaries, I would see that as an offence against you and your neighbours. And I would say, stop that. Don't do that. Don't say that. And she seemed to be shocked by this. And actually goes, well, I'll have to take that away and think about it. And you're thinking, that's so self-evident. That is so self-evident. That doesn't even require a thought. You know, even if you don't believe it in your heart, you know, that's what you say publicly on a podcast like this. I mean, it just blew my mind just how naive she was.
I mean, I don't know what. Well, obviously, there are a few more episodes to come, so we don't know what's going to come up in future episodes. But so far, look, I think it's actually interesting. Some of the people they've had on. It's also interesting who wouldn't take part. So the government's backed away from doing anything with it. Hillary Benn.
It's also interesting that it's confined itself largely to the big issue, to the constitutional issue, the United Ireland, which I think will greatly please Clare, Hanna, that she's made a whole thing about a New Ireland. Suddenly the BBC have launched a big new podcast about New Ireland. I just think the two contributors who have been there, done that, but they've both, in a way, have a reason to be kind of negative. Michelle's been very badly treated by our party, moved around from parliament to parliament, and then she loses an election. Then they give her a staff job. Then they reorganise, and she loses the staff job as well. She's got every right to go independent. And in Ian's case, okay, it was the electorate that sort of knocked him back, but both of them have the experience and the skill to really let loose if they choose. And if they do, based on what we've seen so far, the BBC could be reining it in very fast.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I'm not sure. I think it's just interesting how, because in the podcast they go out to, they obviously experience, so they went to an Irish language class, then they went to a flute band up in Derry, where I'm this evening. And it's interesting listening to the exchanges between them, and hearing the talk. And the BBC kept this in, which surprised me, just because BBC are typically conservative. But she, in the middle of a conversation, she referred to Northern Ireland as a quote unquote shithole. Now that is something that a lot of nationalists would believe. Tim, that unvarnished view of it, I mean, I take it that doesn't please your unit. Although Paisley did retort back to her about, you were the minister and the executive here for a number of years. Do you not take some ownership of this? So.
Well, I was just about to say that. I mean, that's what is then laid bare. It's like, well, if it is this bad, you're part of the problem of it being this way, and your party is part of the problem, who aren't doing anything to facilitate a better Northern Ireland, if that's truly your view. I think, I think it has to be said, look, Chris Buckler does a really good job in the podcast of bringing all these stories out and bringing different perspectives out. I mean, he did a really good bit where he interviews some women at the 12th and that sort of thing, and really brings out what their views are on their grandkids and their great-grandkids and how that's going to play out in the future. And I think that, there's really good stuff and really good stuff in and amongst some of the more scandalous pieces that I think people should go away and listen to, because it is really interesting and I think really serves something for the public debate as well. But look, I come back to this because I've been quite surprised by it as I've listened to through these podcasts. It's just how unvarnished Michelle Gildernew is for someone who's such an experienced politician. I just find it flabbergasting.
That's one of the reasons why the media loved her when she was a Sinn Féin MP, because a lot of people, for anyone who doesn't deal with Sinn Féin politicians, they can be a bit standoffish. With the media, they can be a bit standoffish. Whereas Michelle Gildernew was always very open, very warm with the media. She would always be very, even when she was a Sinn Féin MP. It's
a mystery why she's been so badly treated by Sinn Féin. I mean, she really has been moved from pillar to post.
Outspoken, Michael. She had a Sinn Féin thinking, publicly endorsed John O'Dowd's challenge against Michelle O'Neill. She criticised the party leadership in the past. She has been the most outspoken Sinn Féin politician.
I think there'll be a few in the comms department Sinn Féin with their head in their hands.
She's always been outspoken, even when she was a Sinn Féin MP.
But she's always been an asset. She connects with people.
She does. Well, I'll tell you the big difference now is that she always had, I can win from Anna South Tyrone for you, and she was the only one who could do that for many years. Now with Pat Cullen there, that those credits are now gone.
Well, Pat Cullen, you talk about people with speaking. You haven't even heard a word from her since she was elected. You don't even hear a peep from her.
We'll get her on Stormont Sources.
She did do an interview with Alison Morris in the Belfast Telegraph on Monday. Just FYI on that, just to give.
Well, you never
give Alison her props.
Hear from her.
Okay, if you want to listen to the Borderland podcast, it is available on BBC Sound. It's worth listening. Should declare an interest, by the way, that I did take part in an episode which is yet to be aired. Who knows? That might end up on the cutting room floor.
Well, the only man who could make Michelle Gildernew look good.
And not Ian Paisley as well. I'm disappointed. Okay, look, thanks Tim, thanks Michael, and thank you for joining us on Stormont Sources. Drop us a WhatsApp or a question or a comment, 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont. We'll talk to you again next week. Thank you very much for listening.